Hello everyone, and welcome to Developer Deep Dives, where we dive into programming topics you might encounter while building an e-commerce application. My name is James Luteric, and today we're going to talk about 3 programs that let you call APIs, test them out, and see their responses. Those are Postman, Insomnia, and doing it directly from VS Code. All right, let's get going. First up is Postman. Postman is a leader in calling APIs, testing APIs, and a tool when building APIs. So you can get it directly from postman.com. It is free for the base amount. They do have cloud features and team features that come at a premium level. However, if you are a programmer just trying to call an API, see the responses, you can get by pretty far with that free account. Now, they will try and ask you to create an account, sign up for free, but you don't actually have to do this to use the software. That's what gets you the cloud resources, the cloud workspace, the collaboration aspect of the software. If you just want to try it out before you give them your details, you can download it directly for both Windows, Mac, and Linux right from their website. So you go ahead and download it and install that software. And when you jump into the software for the first time, you shouldn't have any collections, you won't have any environments. It'll really be a blank slate for you to get going. So here I am logged in. The first thing we're actually going to do is figure out if they have any type of dark mode. I'm big on dark mode, and that's very bright. There we go, much better. Now we can see things a little bit without straining our eyes. So the next thing I want to do is start making API calls. And you can build them directly. You can start a blank collection and start building up your set of API calls. But today I'm going to use it with Elastic Path Commerce Cloud, an existing REST API. And instead of building up one call at a time, we're going to use cheat mode and download a pre-existing collection. So I can head over to the Elastic Path documentation. Don't know exactly where it is, but they've got a great search. I can hit Postman. There you go. I've got my first link. And here are your prerequisites. We need to have it installed. Did that. Next up, we need a collection and an environment. And if you'll notice, both of these are actually just JSON files. So if I click on them, it's going to load up the JSON for that collection with all of the API calls that you might want to make. So let's go ahead and save that to our computer. We can put it right on our desktop or anywhere else. And we'll go back and grab the environment as well. The environment isn't the API calls itself, but it's actually a set of variables that you might want to use when leveraging that collection. So things like the URL, what API are you calling, your client ID and client secret. So you're going to go ahead and save this as well, and we're going to import it into Postman. So as you can see, my collection is already imported, but you can go ahead right up here on import and import those 2 files. So you'll have to do it twice. First, you'll import the collection, then you'll import the environment. Now you'll notice that I'm working locally, so I'm not in an online workspace. I don't have a Postman account, so I'm getting this warning. If you signed up for a Postman account, you're using those premium features, you won't get this bar across the top. Okay, so diving right into the Postman collection. So after I import it, you should be able to see all of the different API endpoints and be able to dive in and see the types of calls you can make. The other thing you're going to want to verify is that your environment was imported. So you want to make sure it's up here in your environments. And then also you'll probably want to go in and update the values based on your configuration. So whether you're on a free trial or you already have a store with Elastic Path Commerce Cloud, or you just want to log in to try out these tools, go ahead and go into Commerce Manager and copy out that URL for your specific instance, because it is global. There are multiple areas where it's hosted, and also your specific client ID and client secret. So once you have these set, your environment is now set up. Now notice you can have multiple environments in here. So if you have multiple Elastic Path Commerce Cloud stores, maybe a dev, staging, and production, you can have it in a different environment for each one and be able to call them all directly from Postman. And that's true for any application you're calling. You can swap out these environments as you go, and then all of the environment values will change from one place to another. So let's go ahead and make an API call. We're going to keep it pretty simple and just, grab a token. So here we're calling the OAuth service to capture an access token. You'll notice that things are already pre-filled for us, including the body where we're passing in that client ID and client secret. And if I hit send, I will get the response. I'll get my bearer token, know when it expires, and here is that access token that we can use for follow-up calls. Now, one approach to using this is to go ahead and copy that access token and paste it in wherever else we need it. But Postman has the ability to run tests on that API call. This is very useful, again, if you're in a QA role or development role and you're trying to test your API directly. But here we've used it for a very great purpose, where in the tests, which is just JavaScript, we're actually finding the response, we're grabbing that JSON, we're looking at the data of the response, and we're pulling out the access token. So by pulling out the access token, we can now do something where we put it in an environment variable. So here you go, we're setting it in an environment variable called access token. So I called the authorization, got the access token. And now if I go into that environment again, there should be a value called access token. And sure enough, there is. And notice there was no initial value. This didn't exist in the original file we downloaded, but now there's a current value, which is what it was set to with these tests. So now we have a new environment variable with that access token. So any other call that I want to make, maybe we'll go into carts down here and, maybe we want to create a cart or get a cart. And you go in and the headers will have pre-filled values again. The authorization now will grab that access token. You'll notice the bracket at the beginning and the end. This means that it's an environment variable and we're grabbing it out of here. You'll notice if I hover over it, I see that there was no initial value, but I now have a current value pulled from that last request that I can use for making this one. So in that way, you don't have to be copying and pasting values around Postman if you're using it on a regular basis. And the Elastic Path collection already has all this built in the tests. So, get a cart, that'll go ahead and set a new variable cart ID. So now if I want to update that cart, I don't have to copy the value. It'll just be there for those update actions. So it's very useful for bouncing around from one request to another. It is important to keep track of what they're set to. If you're creating multiple carts, you're not going to have multiple environment variables. You're going to have one called cart ID. So it's going to be the last one created or the last one queried. So that is something to keep in mind. Also keep in mind that Postman has no way to auto expire that access token. So it's going in the environment variable, but once it expires, you need to go back to authentication and get a new one. Otherwise, you're going to start getting errors that you don't have access to these resources. So overall, Postman is a great tool. It's adopted, across the industry. So most companies have collections already pre-built. A lot of people are already using it, so it's easier to collaborate, to share, to talk to people around it. The UI is good. I wouldn't say it's great, but it is very feature rich. As you can see, you have your collections, environments, you can do mock servers. You can build up API test paths where you're going to call the same API or different APIs in a row. And maybe you're going to do that 10, 20, 30 times and understand the performance and whether anything changed across those calls. So it's a very robust tool. It has a lot of features. And if you go to that premium level, it has even more. The next tool I want to talk about is Insomnia. Insomnia is a competitor to Postman. It is built by Kong, a company that does a lot with Kubernetes, that does a lot of great open source work. And like many of their other products, Insomnia is also open source. So it is completely free, it is completely open source, and it is ready to go. They also have online features and a login that you can use. That comes with a cost using that cloud account. But again, if you just want to, test out an API or use things yourself, you can probably get by with the downloadable installation file. And again, you have it across Windows, Mac, and Linux. So regardless of what operating system you use, it has you covered. So going into the Insomnia application, you'll see that you also have this idea of collections. And you can create a new collection, you can start building up your own, or Insomnia has a neat trick in that you can actually import Postman collections and environments. So I can import from a file, and that file can be that collection.json that we downloaded for Postman. And it will also work with Insomnia to get you going faster. So I already did that. I imported the collection, and you can see it's got a nice clean interface. Here's my same collection that the other one was, and it's got a few other great things. So Insomnia had GraphQL support before Postman did. Same thing with gRPC. So Postman caught up with all of those, but it is leading the edge on making specific calls beyond just HTTP. But here we're going to work with a REST call, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go into authentication, and we're going to grab an access token. So let's go ahead and call that. And we failed to render the value before sending. And that's because I'm trying to pull in this collection that is being used by Postman and doesn't have the same tests or the same values. So we're going to clean it up a little bit and see if we can get this to run. All right, so I got rid of this variable that didn't exist. It's an unneeded variable anyway from the Postman collection. And I hit run, and boom, I've got that access token now, and I've got the values. You'll notice that there is no tests tab. So Insomnia doesn't use the JavaScript language for testing the same way Postman does, so that did not get imported automatically. There are ways to chain requests in in Insomnia. So you can chain those requests in Insomnia, but you'll have to set that up yourself, or again, you'll have to copy that access token and move it around. I did appreciate that Insomnia grabbed my OS settings immediately and put us right into dark mode. Unfortunately, it is an Electron app, so this top bar isn't quite right. Hopefully that is something they update in the future. So that is Insomnia, another great choice for calling APIs. Now the third one I want to talk about is using VS Code directly. So if you're testing APIs, if you're building them, a dedicated tool probably makes sense. But if you're a programmer that's just trying to understand the APIs before you start writing code, you don't really want to swap around between different tools. Instead, you want to do everything directly within your IDE. And maybe you could do this from Bash with curl, whatever IDE you have. I personally use VS Code, so we're going to talk about a VS Code plugin that's gotten a lot of popularity lately. And that is the REST Client plugin. So you can install this into VS Code, again, whether you're using Mac, Windows, or Linux. I use both Windows and Linux, so it's great to have that choice. And as you can see, right from the tagging, it supports things like GraphQL, HTTP, REST, etc. It does come with a little bit more of a learning curve than the other two because it's not just, clicking around, hitting submit. Instead, you're within the editor, so you do have to build out some files to get going. So I actually did that for Elastic Path Commerce Cloud to help out and get everyone up and running. So the first thing is, let's talk about those environment variables. So before we had in Postman that you could have multiple environments, you could swap between them, and you can set them up through the interface. With this plugin that we have installed, it allows you to do environment variables in two ways. One is by creating this .vs code folder, which actually lets you set certain settings for VS Code in a file. So let's open up the example, and you can see that I've got some variables in here. Now you can actually have multiple environments again with this tool. So I can have one called your store. I can copy this and have a few more, and I can put these store specific variables in there. But you can also have shared variables. So if all of your stores live at US East, you can set up your base URL and auth URL and just reference them from those sub environments. So that is one way that you can set up your environment variables and reuse them across your calls. Another way is to use .env files. A lot of programmers are already familiar with the concept of a .env file, so you can go ahead and add that, and then you can add your own variables that can be used across multiple calls again. So let's talk about making calls with this tool. So when you want to make calls, you're going to create files with a .http extension. And then the plugin's going to pick that up and say, okay, this is, where I need to tie in. This is where I need to do some work. So I created an example HTTP here that we can play with. And the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and, create that token, get it from the server. And you'll see that there's commenting available. So a single hash gives you some comments. And if you do 3 of them, that indicates that you're starting a new API request. So here I've got one for get client credentials token, and I'm breaking it up with another one for get all products. So I gave it a name, the client credentials token, and I'll explain why in a minute. And then simple language, post, give it a URL. You can paste in the exact URL if you want to, or you can use those variables that we set up in that settings.json. So you can see I'm grabbing that auth URL, hover over it, it's showing me exactly what's going to be called. Then you can throw in your headers. We've got an accept, a content type. You can set up the form submission. What are the values that you're going to submit to this post? So here we have client ID, client secret. And again, I hover over them. They're telling me what's going to get passed in. And then I'm going to give it that grant type for the client credentials flow, which is the same thing we did with Postman and Insomnia. And then it's going to inject this little send request text here. So you'll notice that's not in my code. It's between lines 2 and 3. It's right before that post. And if I click this, it'll actually open up a new window and it'll show me the response. It'll give me all the values, 200 okay, all the different items that come in. So, it didn't hit the cache here. I'm getting a new token, so there's no way to cache that. As we know, Elastic Commerce Cloud does a lot for speed optimization. That includes caching. And then it gives you the JSON that it got back. So here we can grab that bearer, when it expires, and the access token itself. And you're going to want to reuse this access token across multiple calls. So you have 3 ways to do that. The first is to put your auth in the same file as your follow-up calls. So I put it in the same file, and you can see right here that I can set a new file level variable called @token. So this variable is similar to the environment ones, but instead of being for the entire project, everything we're working with, it is specific to this one file, example.http. So you can have a token for each file in your project. And I can actually set it by grabbing the response body from a previous call. So remember, I named this. I gave it that name, client credentials token. Well, now I can reference that name, client credentials token, grab the response body, and then finally the access token. So now I have this token to use on follow-up requests. The other way, if you're going to be bouncing around files a lot and not doing everything in one place, is to actually just copy it and either put it in your environment or put it in your settings.json. Now, you'll be responsible for fixing it every time it expires, but you can see the code for those 2 here as well. So for doing it, from the environment variables, it's just calling the access token. So add token equals this. Or for doing it with the .environment, you use this notation, $.environment, and then access token. And all of these will grab that access token from their different places, whether it's the .environment, the settings.json, or the request that you've already made, and it'll put it in this new file variable called @token. And then you can make follow-up requests down the page. So here we're just going to do a basic request called, get all carts. So let me send this, and boom, it's getting the value. It's going to go out, it's going to call the server, and it's going to get the response. So I don't have anything in my project, but we're good to go. But again, you're seeing the entire response right here on the right. And I was playing with it earlier, so we could also say, let's change this to products as an example. And I can hit send again. And again, I'm getting the response right from the server. So this is a great way to experiment with an API before you write code. And instead of relying on someone's cloud service, you can check this into GitHub and someone else can see your path. So if you're trying to define, maybe how you make a specific product and you want to have a clear path before you start writing code on what values you're expecting and what setup you need, you can do it all in one HTTP file. Or maybe you want to walk through from the product page all the way through checkout. Again, you can have it all in one file and they can be chained together. In order to get everyone going using this tool, I created a bunch of example requests. And this is going to follow the same format as the Postman collection, where it's going to show you all of the example requests. And my idea here is not that you're going to go into this file, hit send, and bounce around from file to file like you do in Postman, where you start with auth and then you go to the other ones. No, instead, I'd rather you grab the pieces you need, copy them out, and start building up your own request library specific to the tasks you're trying to accomplish, specific to your project. With these API first tools, they're very extensible, and the Postman collection shows off that extensibility. But this tool will allow you to dive in and focus on specific problem cases, get them into your code repository and share them with anyone else doing it. So they can go in and say, okay, look, we're getting a client credentials token, we're calling all of the products. Easy peasy, ready to go. And you can show all of your paths before you go and start writing the code. So I will probably be using this in future videos while we talk about specific use cases. Just because I like that it's all in one screen and I don't need to bounce around from place to place, and remember which call I need to make. I can build it up and then rerun the path multiple times as I go. So that's your comparison of 3 tools. I think they're all great tools. The last 2 are fully open source. Both Insomnia, this plugin, and VS Code are all open source, which I appreciate. Postman is the leading in the industry, so it's worth understanding and knowing how to work with Postman. And they all work across all of the operating systems. So they're all great ways to get started in your API evaluation, API coding, or just getting better at using the API without having to write a ton of code, making sure that things work at the API level before you layer on things like an SDK or Axios or request or whatever code you're using to call that API. It can sometimes really help with the debugging process. So thank you very much. I hope you appreciate this overview of the 3 softwares, and I look forward to seeing you next time on Developer Deep Dives.